Hi everyone and welcome to Module 5. In Module 5 you're going to be looking at the resource market, which is focused on the labor market. And we look at the resource market, we're looking at how firms will manage the cost of labor. And you notice that cost of labor is a very expensive component in a business. And it's one of the largest expenses that any business will have to really incur. So for this week, we're looking at demand and supply and resource market, and we're looking at the cost of labor. The cost of labor is evaluated in a couple of different areas. You'll notice that firms, we look at this graph right here, firms are more willing to hire workers at lower wages rather than higher wages. We have this thing called marginal revenue product. The marginal revenue product is looking at how much each additional worker brings in with regard to revenue. How much each additional revenue, how much additional revenue that each worker brings in. That's a very important point, because when you hire an additional worker, if you pay them, let's say, $500 a day, and they only bring in $250 in additional revenue, that was not a good hire. Our theory is you want to hire a worker up to the point where the revenue that they bring in equals the amount that you pay them. So for this week, we're going to be focusing on the final assignment and the discussion board. So for the final assignment, you have a lot of questions to answer. You have 8 questions that should be within 100 to 200 words. You should be submitting your work by Monday of the next week. And here's the questions that you're looking at. The first question, and I'm going to go through some of the things that you should focus on. Make sure to go to the doc sharing right here and look at the analysis in terms of my APA formatted document. Use that document. A lot of you are not using that. If you would use that document, it would save you a lot of time and a lot of easy points. So the first question is looking at derived demand. And derived demand is focused on how much a firm is producing, and the firm is producing it based on how much people want of a product. A good example that I always focus on is when we look at Beanie Babies. There was no market for Beanie Babies at all. And now there is a market for, there's no market now for Beanie Babies because no one wants them. But there used to be a market for Beanie Babies. And because of the Beanie Baby market, we would produce them. Question 2 is looking at what factors would cause the supply curve to shift. Now the supply of labor is looking at workers. Now workers would like incentives to work. Workers would always also like productivity changes and different work environments. Those are supply factors that they would like to focus on. Now, when you look at labor market changes, focus on those changes like Google. Google has a lot of opportunities to provide a very nice environment for workers to want to work in. That's a good thing. That's happened. The work environment. Question 3 is looking at how a firm determines its price and quantity of labor required in the resource market. So prices and quantities are determined by supply and demand in the labor market. Question 4 is looking at income inequality. Income inequality is looking at how the rich keep getting richer and how the poor keep getting poorer. So we're having this gap that exists. And given that there's this large gap, you notice that we have a lot of challenges we're facing on our economy. And the large gap is one of the big issues, because how do we bring about equality? Question 5 is looking at income equality and what should the government do? Do you think the government should bring about income equality or not? Do you think it's fair for the government to tax the rich and give it more to the poor? Should the government provide more incentives for the poor to actually become more, to gain more income levels? Those are things you want to look at in question 5. Question 6 is looking at trading. And we look at comparative advantage. You're looking at trading based off of what firms can produce based off having the lowest opportunity cost. When a firm has the lowest opportunity cost, they're able to produce because they give up less resources. Question 7 is looking at trade imbalances. When we look at the U.S., you notice we have a very large trade deficit. When we have a trade deficit, this means that our economy is having more imports than we have exports. And that's a very big challenge for an economy to focus on. When you notice this negative trade balance, this can create a lot of challenges with economic growth because we're not producing more in terms of exports. Because we're not producing things here, we're not having many jobs being produced. That's a key component here. And question A is looking at how are exchange rates determined. Exchange rates are determined again by supply and demand and the significance of a currency's devaluation. So if a currency devalues, that means the currency becomes relatively inexpensive. If the currency becomes relatively inexpensive, you'll notice that a lot of products will be bought and sold in terms of a lot of exports because another currency has appreciated and they can take advantage of this. Now, for the discussion this week, you need to make sure to have your first post by Saturday and the 2 remaining posts by Wednesday. With this week, make sure to focus on having that in-text citation and reference in APA formatting. That's the key component. What you're looking at, what role, if any, should the U.S. government play in healthcare coverage? So should there be universal healthcare or not? Provide necessary support for this, because that'll be very important. You'll also be looking at, should the government's role in terms of health insurance be different with those with jobs and those without jobs? So that means if I have a job, should I get the same amount of coverage if I don't have a job? And lastly, I want to thank you for being involved in the classes. I really appreciate it. If you could, go to the surveys and fill out the surveys, as that's really important, as your feedback is very valuable, and I look forward to your effort.